Right before the big college entrance exam, the transfer student Ruby liked was upset again. Because he said he didn't want to see me. She told me to transfer schools. That school is pretty good too. When he calms down, I'll bring you back. Don't make things difficult for me, Brian, she said. I nodded in agreement, packed my things, and got ready to leave. Her best friend tried to convince her. Brian has a hearing impairment. Remember? What if he gets bullied going to another school alone? You two grew up together. You really willing to send him away? Ruby raised an eyebrow. That was before. And anyway, in less than 3 months, I'll have him back. 3 months later, when Ruby called me to come back, a girl next to me giggled by my hearing aid. Sweetie, you gotta close your eyes when you kiss. And no answering calls from other women. On the day the mock exam results were announced, I moved up from 5th to 3rd in the grade. Dennis, on the other hand, fell from 20th to outside the top 30. Someone remarked, how did Dennis fall so much? And Brian jumped up 2 places. Dennis shot me a glare. Brian, bet you're happy now. You're studying so hard just to make others think Ruby made a bad choice choosing me, right? Having said that, he stormed out. Even when the class bell rang, he didn't come back. Not knowing what was happening, the teacher asked me, the class president, to find Dennis. Half an hour later, I saw Dennis sitting by the flower bed next to the basketball court. Ruby was there, quietly coaxing him. Whatever she said, it made Dennis laugh. Sunlight filtered through the trees, casting a scene like a high school romance drama. When they saw me, Ruby narrowed her eyes. To vent for Dennis, she aimed a badminton shuttlecock at me, only to accidentally hit my hearing aid. After a buzz in my ear, I couldn't hear anything with my left ear. Ruby clearly didn't expect that. A flash of surprise in her eyes disappeared quickly. Then she walked over. Brian, you should transfer. Dennis has a temper and he always picks a fight because of you. Just a month ago, she asked me, Brian, after the college entrance exam, will you be my boyfriend? With the exam approaching, my instinct was to decline. But Ruby said, Brian, don't make it hard for me. With you here, Dennis is upset every day. You don't want to put your uncle through stress, right? My dad worked for Ruby's family. For Dennis, she was threatening my dad's job, and I couldn't let him be unemployed in his midlife. All right, I said. Ruby seemed relieved. When he calms down, I'll bring you back. Dennis seemed to overhear and came over, tugging arrogantly at Ruby's hand. Ruby, I think Z High School seems pretty good. Z High was the lowest ranked in our city. Ruby knew too, but she just smiled casually and said, all right, whatever you say. I clenched the broken hearing aid piece in my palm so tightly it dug into my flesh. After a long time, I tossed the broken hearing aid into the trash. Then I turned and left. Ruby quickly arranged my transfer. The whole school learned about me transferring. While packing, everyone gossiped. No way. Ruby's really kicking Brian out for Dennis. They grew up together. Ruby used to treat Brian so well, but ever since Dennis showed up, she hasn't walked home with Brian. What a shame. Brian's grades were so good. He could have gotten into a top university, and transferring now would really mess things up. He's going to Z High, the infamous home of troublemakers. All Brian's hard work might go to waste. Under everyone's sympathetic stares, I hugged my stuff and prepared to leave. In the stairwell, I heard Ruby's friend urging her. Brian has a hearing impairment. Remember? Sending him to another school alone. Won't he get bullied? You two grew up together. Are you really willing to send him away? Ruby leaned against the wall, chuckling lightly. What's there to be unwilling about? The past is the past, and I'll have him back in 3 months. After saying that, she seemed to notice something and looked up, seeing me at the stairwell entrance. Her gaze fell on my slightly red and swollen ear, and she frowned. She instinctively came up and took my hand. Come on, let's buy you a new hearing aid. Call it compensation. I shook my head. No need. That hearing aid was a gift from you. Now it's even. When she broke my hearing aid, the pain in my ear made me resolve to cut ties with Ruby. Ruby was stunned. That hearing aid was a gift on my 17th birthday. Ruby's family didn't believe in lavish spending on kids. Her pocket money wasn't much. She worked a summer job for 2 months to buy it for me, using all her pocket money. Back then, when I was asleep, 17-year-old Ruby quietly put that hearing aid on me. Ruby was incredibly good to me, to the point where her mom joked countless times about me being her future son-in-law. Ruby would reply with a bold smile, "Don't need you to say it. I've raised my son-in-law for years. You think I'd give him to someone else?" Everyone believed we would go to college together, date, and eventually marry. Ruby grew up next door with her grandpa. We grew up together. She woke me up in the mornings and carried my backpack every day. She confessed and I, blushing, agreed. Everything changed when Dennis showed up. As a new transfer student, he caught Ruby's eye immediately. I knew from then that something was different. Sure enough, Ruby got closer to Dennis and stopped riding to and from school with me. The bike seat became Dennis' spot. Even as I distanced myself from Ruby, Dennis still disliked me, accusing me of studying hard to make it look like Ruby made the wrong choice. Over time, even Ruby believed it and was annoyed, holding Dennis's hand and publicly calling me conniving. Dennis accused me of overstepping boundaries, calling me a third party in their relationship. But I had grown up with Ruby. She confessed to me and said we'd be together after college exams. Ruby stood silently on the side, never explaining. I was completely disheartened. I thought staying away from her would bring peace. Until today. Ruby opened her mouth, wanting to say something. Dennis interrupted. "Ruby, come on, let's go back together." She glanced at me and then left. Returning home, at the dinner table, Dad timidly mentioned he wanted to quit his job and start a small business, carefully seeking Mom's and my opinion. "If I start a business, our lives won't be as stable and money's tight. I think maybe we sell this house and get one in the suburbs. What do you think?" Mom hesitated. "Maybe not. Brian's about to start college soon. Once he graduates, we need to prepare a dowry just in case. We're not getting any younger." They know about me and Ruby, so even though many people have tried to lure Dad away from Ruby's family over the years, he never wavered. In fact, since Ruby is an only child, my dad has been especially dedicated to his work with her family. Dad pursed his lips and said, "True." I suddenly spoke up, interrupting her. "Dad, I support your decision to start your own business. I know his abilities well. He's got years of experience and the resources he needs in the industry. Over the years, we've depleted our savings because of Grandma and Grandpa's health issues. He must be really eager to start his own business and has thought it through carefully. Otherwise, he wouldn't bring it up now. Do what you want to do." My dad's eyes turned red. Mom chimed in, "Brian, you've really grown up. Well, go ahead and do it." Once it was decided, Mom immediately contacted a real estate agent. Even though the house is old, it's in a central location. Plus, with Dad offering a fair price, the deal was closed quickly. The new owner agreed to let us stay for a few more days. Every day after work, my parents went to look at houses in the suburbs. The day of my birthday arrived. My mom got off work early and asked me to bring some birthday cake over to Ruby's place. I hesitated for a moment but eventually went to Ruby's front door, spurred on by Mom. She didn't know that it was Ruby who pushed for me to transfer schools. After all, Ruby always said it was my idea. Though she didn't agree with it, seeing the transfer had already been processed, she just sighed and didn't say much else. It was Ruby's mom who opened the door. Seeing me, she said happily, "Brian, nice to see you." "Yeah, my mom asked me to bring over some cake." Just then, I heard laughter coming from Ruby's room. It was Dennis's voice. Sure enough, Ruby, in a short and revealing dress, came out with Dennis trailing behind. Ruby's mom looked embarrassed. "Brian, he's just a friend Ruby brought over." I knew what she wanted to say and shook my head. "Don't worry about it, ma'am. I've dropped off the cake, so I'll head out." I said this and left right away. I heard her scolding Ruby. "Ruby, aren't you being too much? You used to like Brian, didn't you? You'll hurt his feelings. Brian's probably upset now." And then Ruby's nonchalant response, "Whatever." The next morning, my parents and I followed the moving company to our new home. Dad opted for a well-maintained second-hand place because of the price. Conveniently, it was really close to Z High School. On my first day at Z High, I refused my parents' offer to drop me off. I knew Dad was busy with his new business, so I took my backpack and went alone. The class teacher was a chubby lady who looked really pleased to see me. When I got to the classroom door, there was a ruckus inside. Because I'm deaf in my left ear, my right ear is super sensitive. So when someone slammed a chair, it startled me. Smiling soothingly, she said, "Don't be scared, wait here for a bit." Then she walked in, hands on her hips, and hollered, "Quiet down, all of you." No one paid attention. Her face flushed red, "Or else, I'm calling your parents." That finally got them to pipe down. Today, our class has a new transfer student. I walked in, stood at the podium, and introduced myself simply. "Hi everyone, I'm Brian." There was a chorus of screams. "The transfer student is so cute. Quick, is my hairstyle okay today?" From a corner of the class, someone grumbled impatiently. "So noisy." Silence fell. Surprised, I watched as the teacher, annoyed, directed me to sit in front of that person. I hesitated. The teacher reassured me it's okay. She doesn't pick fights with good people. Rather intimidating. My seatmate, a guy, introduced himself. "I'm George." I nodded. When the teacher came in, I took out my books right away. The pace at Z-High is definitely different from my old school. During class, most students do their own thing. Some sleep, others read novels, some even do their nails. Paper planes with cheat sheets scribbled on them flew over my head. It seemed like the teacher was used to it. After sipping some tea, he asked, "Where did I leave off?" I gently reminded him the third big question. He nodded, astonished. Someone's actually listening to me? Later, George told me if Z-High is considered a subpar school, then class 13, my class, was at the very bottom. It gathered all the struggling seniors. When I transferred, the class teacher cried her eyes out in front of the principal just to snag me. Watching George eat ice cream as teachers taught, I realized how bizarre but lively this world felt. After that, the teacher clearly got more enthusiastic about teaching. Gradually, a few students got motivated and began to listen too. Until dismissal time, everyone rushed out. I noticed a girl in the corner still asleep. The school was about to close. I approached her and said, "School's out." She looked up, her eyes focusing. Her sharp gaze locked onto mine. A high nose bridge and a slight smirk on her lips. "Thanks." In the next second, she stood, not explaining. Her long fingers hooked onto her jacket's collar and swung it over her shoulder. "Let's go. The gate's closing soon." I snapped out of it and agreed, then trailed behind her. With a hand on her black bike, she painted quite the picture. Others passing by glanced at her, but she seemed used to it. I intentionally slowed down, creating more space between us. But she also slowed her pace. Sunlight poured before her, and her shadow stretched to my feet. She turned to me and said, "You're slower than a snail, dude," so casually friendly. Walking back, I realized we lived in the same complex. She did too, smiling slightly. From George, I learned her name was Linda. During lunch, I saw a bunch of girls following Linda in the cafeteria, waving her meal card around. "Linda, I blew through my allowance this month. Help me out." "Me too." Sensing my gaze, she glanced at me, said "scram," yet still handed over her card. The crowd departed instantly. A few days later, the class teacher set up a one-on-one tutoring program. Basically, class ranking dictated partners. The top performs would help the bottom ones. Second would help the second to the last. And so on. Alright, let's start pairing you up. Starting with Brian. Who's last from the bottom? The last one. There was a girl in front who immediately stood up and raised her hand. Someone stood up behind her, with a cool voice. "It's me." The girl turned around. "Linda, stop messing around. Last time you scored 2 points higher than me. I am the last in the class homeroom teacher. Please help me, class monitor." A few days ago, I was appointed class monitor by the teacher. Linda gave her a look. "I cheated last time." The other person sat down in a huff, muttering, "Cheating when it's just a difference of a few points?" While tutoring Linda, I found out she doesn't really solve the problems during the exams. Until I had her complete an exam paper. She scored almost perfectly. Then why was she at the bottom? I looked through her other papers. Well, she's really good at some subjects, but really bad at others. After explaining a few problems, she quickly grasped the concepts. People who are good at math are just smart. I was a bit jealous. After all, I have been self-studying and doing homework every day since elementary school, rarely going out on weekends. Even doing late-night tutoring, washing my face with cold water to continue reviewing during late nights when I was sleepy. I only explained a few knowledge points, yet she quickly understood them thoroughly. After a period of tutoring, I realized Linda has a great memory, but her essay writing skills were really lacking. So, I explained to her the key points of writing an essay. It's okay to use some figures of speech and idioms and elaborate a bit. After a while, she leaned slightly on the desk behind her, eyebrows slightly raised. Like what? She could just try to combine an idiom into a simple sentence. She chuckled. Okay. For example, when the class monitor and I happen to fall asleep on the desk. You can add an idiom to it. I encouraged her with a look. The early summer heat was rising. I took a sip of the juice my mom brought. She looked at me, her dark eyes deep. Just now, the class monitor and I had a romantic nap together. The juice I just sipped sprayed out completely, leaving nothing behind. There's half a month left before the college entrance exams. Nearly every day there's a mock exam. The atmosphere was tense. The homeroom teacher changed the last self-study class to free activity. George came up to me. After the college exams end, I'll have to part with my goddess. What a college entrance exam season, more like a secret crush ending season. I remembered walking past the sports field last time when he pointed out a girl and told me it's his goddess. A girl whose glasses are thicker than a beer bottle and always has a book in hand. George went to bring her water, and she just glanced at him, saying, "You should give up, George. I won't be with someone who's a failing student." I wanted to comfort George, yet he said, as expected from a cool academic star, really cold, but that makes me like her more. The school med room hasn't done vision tests for ages. It seems George's eyesight isn't that great. Brian, do you want to date someone? Dating. I paused my pen. Someone's breath washed over my neck from behind, seemingly waiting for my answer. I shook my head. Dating is less rewarding than solving more problems. The next day, on the way home from school, Linda blocked me in a small alley. Brian, let's talk after the college entrance exam. Talk about what? She leaned in, staring straight at me. About dating. So she does like me. I pressed my lips. No way. Why not? Your essay scored 3 points. She ruffled her hair, looking aggrieved. So what? I smirked. Tomorrow's mock exam. Score an average on your essay. Linda gritted her teeth. All right. In my pocket, my phone vibrated. I took it out and accidentally answered it. Ruby's voice came through the phone. Brian, pack up your things. Come back to school tomorrow. The superior, granting tone left a weird feeling always. As if she only had to speak, and I should pack up, joyfully returning. I was baffled. As I was about to hang up, someone near my hearing aid spoke out first. Sweetheart, you should close your eyes when kissing. Also, don't take calls from other women. Ruby on the other end, with a hint of anger. Who are you? Brian, before I change my mind, pack up and come back quickly. I looked up, seeing Linda's rebellious face without explaining. Nah, I'm good at Z High School. Ruby let out a frustrated laugh. Brian, you'd better not play games with me. Z High School, a place like that, do you really plan to stay there until college entrance exams? Isn't your dream to get into a prestigious university? Turns out she knew what I wanted. She knew Z High School doesn't offer the best education. But why should that mean anything? She forced me to move, sneaking into a transfer. But now, close to the exams, wants me back? I hung up and blocked her number. When Ruby tried calling back, all she heard was the standard customer service reply. Brian had blocked her. In over 3 months, she hadn't seen him. Without someone to prepare breakfast, she felt something missing. Even when with Dennis, she often looked back to see the face always behind her, now gone. She thought it's only because they grew up together. Adjusting to separation takes time. She didn't dwell on it, but every night, she stood by Brian's building, watching his room light on, feeling at ease. Just a spat, she thought. Z high school starts later than they do, so for over 3 months they've never run into each other. But thinking of the girl's voice earlier, she couldn't help but mind. Then she thought Brian likes her. So when she confessed, he blushed and nodded. Growing up together, she understood Brian, ever modest and cautious. How could he date in a place like Z high school? Much less kiss? He must have got someone to say that on purpose to get under her skin. Thinking this, she slightly let it go. Still, she went to his building, seeing shadows behind curtains, relaxing her heart. After the mock exam ended, Linda cornered me in the equipment room. I was heading downstairs to the store. Linda's standing downstairs. When she hears a sound, she looks at me with a burning gaze. What are you doing here? She steps forward, the sunlight making her look dazzling. I blink. What are you talking about? She laughs and precisely touches the spot behind my ear. Even with hair covering it, she presses on my hearing aid. I know you're wearing a hearing aid. You're not trying to back out, are you? She grits her teeth like she's ready to bite me if I confess. I mumble, no. She stands up straight and clears her throat. Good. Let's go, our date awaits. She smiles boldly. After the college entrance exam results came out, our class teacher sent a message in the group chat inviting everyone for a final meetup. She's treating us. Everyone did better than she expected. Cheers filled the group chat. The meetup was set for 7 p.m. When I came downstairs, Linda was waiting at the door. Seeing me, a smirk formed on her lips and she held my hand tightly. When we reached the restaurant, I pulled my hand away before going inside, avoiding her suddenly darkened face. Someone was curious. Is the class president close to Linda? Why did they come together? I gave a half-hearted explanation, not close. Linda looked up, a little hurt in her eyes. Yeah, not close. We only kissed for half an hour. Not just kissed for half an hour. There was even a string of saliva when we parted. Her pale pink lips were flushed red even now. When the server opened the door to serve the food, everyone hollered about eating up the teacher's salary. No one heard her words clearly. After loitering in the restroom and splashing my face with cold water a few times, the heat of the moment finally faded. When I came out, Linda was leaning against the hallway, her sharp eyes watching me. Even the dark strands across her forehead exuded a rebellious vibe. The weather was too hot, so she wore a pure white t-shirt with a simple silver necklace around her neck. Seeing me, she instinctively pulled out a tissue from her pocket, gently drying my hands that were still wet. What about them? Why's the room so quiet? Linda asked, her voice slightly hoarse as she looked at my hands. It's getting late. I told them to leave. Let's go. We should head back too. I already paid the bill, I said, agreeing. Ruby found out Brian's result from her mom. She remembered how 17-year-old Brian often studied late into the night, losing weight until she insisted he rest by 10 p.m. Brian's eyes sparkled, saying his dream was to get into a top college. Back then, she casually promised, sure, if you get in, I'll celebrate with you. Even if she hadn't promised, Brian would have been thrilled to tell her as soon as he got accepted into his dream school. But now she learned about it from her mom. Ruby realized that ever since Brian went to Z High School, he hadn't reached out to her. Dennis told her Brian only did it to provoke him. But now, with the exams over, Brian seemed to have disappeared from her life. She walked to his house, his room light was still on. Ruby breathed a sigh of relief, knocked on the door. Someone came to open it. Trying to control her expression, she said, "Ma'am, I'm looking for?" She stopped mid-sentence. In front of her stood unfamiliar middle-aged folks in pajamas. Who are you? Why are you in Brian's house? The couple frowned at her. Brian, this is our house. Thinking for a second, they explained, you mean the previous owners. This house? We bought it over 3 months ago. Where did they move? She inquired. How would I know? They replied, closing the door. Ruby stood there, confused. Brian moved away? How come she didn't know? Why didn't he tell her where he was going? Was he never coming back? As she was contemplating asking more questions, her phone beeped. A friend sent her a message. Check out Brian's Twitter. He'd made an announcement. Ruby opened Brian's Twitter. A rare occasion as he seldom used social media, especially Twitter. Despite being blocked on his phone, Twitter was not. Today she saw a picture of him and a girl. The girl wore a white dress, her dark hair with an air of confidence. She looked up at the boy beside her in a white shirt. They were standing under a large banyan tree, looking perfect together. His caption read, "Puppy's Diary." At home, I opened my eyes to see the dim lights highlighting her slender white neck. Instinctively, I wanted to leave a mark, so I kissed it. She stiffened, her breathing quickened. Moments later, I pulled back, leaving a faint red mark. Her eyes were dark and deep, like she'd devour me. I suddenly recalled a phrase from a post I'd read. At 18 or 19, their heads are filled with uncontrollable thoughts. Can't resist temptation. I jumped out of the car and started to run home. Linda followed, grabbed my hand, pulling me back. With that same look in her eyes, "Linda, what do you want?" I asked. She stared at me, silent for a while before standing on tiptoe to kiss my neck. "Returning the favor," she said, then let my hand go. As I was about to leave, a raspy voice called my name from a distance. "Brian." I looked over. In the dim streetlight, Ruby stood there, pale as a ghost, walking towards me. "We need to talk." I honestly didn't expect to see Ruby again. After all, after my dad quit, we moved away, leaving no strings attached. I sighed, there's nothing left to talk about. I started heading upstairs. She moved closer, pleading just for a little bit. "Brian, I'm sorry, okay? I shouldn't have transferred you to Z High before the exams. I'm not with Dennis anymore. I thought we'd never part. It was just a whim. We never really started. I've already ended it with him. Let's reconcile, do you think?" Ruby's a proud person by nature. I'd never seen her with such hope and pleading in her eyes before. "We can't go back, Ruby." Not wanting to hear more, I tugged on Linda's sleeve. Linda lowered her head, tussling my hair. "You go on ahead." I nodded and walked away briskly. Ruby tried to follow but was stopped by Linda. I could hear them talking but didn't stop. What's to worry about from a tough girl who can stand her ground in a fight? But I did hear some of their conversation. "Who do you think you are?" "I've grown up with Brian, you know?" Linda replied coolly, "But so what? I'm his girlfriend." As the elevator door closed, I couldn't hear any more of their voices. Ruby didn't say anything else. Her lips were bruised and purple. Linda really hit her hard. She heard Brian upstairs calling Linda. His voice from the other side. "Are you hurt?" That's when she finally realized Brian didn't care about her anymore. Once, she got into a fight and came back worried her mom would nag her. So she went straight to Brian's house. Back then, Brian would take a cotton swab and gently treat her wounds. "Does it still hurt?" She used to believe that as long as she turned back, Brian would be there for her. She was so confidently sure of it. In the end, Brian had moved on completely. He had a new girlfriend. She remembered the stubborn way Brian's back looked when he left, his ear bruised and purple from a basketball hit. Her friend sighed and warned her. "Aren't you afraid he might never come back?" In her heart, she sneered. Brian's dad worked for her family's company, and his family lived nearby. Everything about Brian was tied to her. It was just a change of schools. Why wouldn't he come back to her? That day, under the sunset, her friend said, "Ruby, your first love might end up being someone else's miracle." She didn't listen. Looking back now, it feels so ironic. Linda and I got engaged during the summer before our junior year of college. On the engagement day, Linda's parents showed up. After being with Linda, it was the first time I saw her parents. She'd only told me that she grew up with her grandparents in an old house. As for her parents, she only mentioned their divorce when she was 7 and said nothing more. Linda's mom came back from overseas very poised. Her dad couldn't take his eyes off her mom from the moment she appeared. My mom walked over, a bit surprised, asking, "Aren't you Mary from the apartment upstairs?" Only then I realized, Linda's family used to live just upstairs from us. Her parents divorced and Linda moved away. Eventually, that apartment was put up for sale. Gradually, I forgot about the little girl, until Ruby's family moved in. I often used to go upstairs to find her and play. A memory surfaced of a little girl using her allowance to buy me candy. Her innocent voice echoed in my ears. I looked at Linda, surprised. Remembering the day she fought with Ruby, she'd said, "When it comes to childhood sweethearts, it's me and Brian." We'd known each other long before she was even around. Turns out she was telling the truth. After our wedding reception, I received an anonymous gift. A property transfer agreement, already signed by Ruby. When I went to college, Ruby tried to see me a few times. But Linda was on guard, and I refused to meet her. All she could do was wait outside my dorm night after night. Later, I heard she went abroad, got into a shooting incident and hurt a leg. Dennis would often ask about Ruby in group chats. His college entrance scores weren't great, and he got into an art school in the South, leveraging his dance background. He quickly went through a few rich heiress girlfriends, but none lasted. He tried reaching out to Ruby abroad, but she never replied. Linda emerged from the shower, sneering at the signed agreement. Doesn't know when to quit. Why would she give this to me? I tossed it in the trash and wrapped my arms around Linda's waist. She looked down and her eyes deepened. Ready to go again? Been doing this a while yet still. You're a tease. After a pause, I changed the topic. Did you recognize me right from the start? Linda ruffled my hair, nodded. Yeah. Was it just because of the past that you liked me? She replied, No, Brian. You're my childhood and my love at first sight. Music filled the living room. At this moment, I'm immensely grateful. My world, after going round and round, still ends up with you. My fingers slid under Linda's shirt, resting on her belly. She took a deep breath, gripping my wrist, meeting my lips in a hungry kiss. The urgency grew until her arms circled my neck. I stood, laying her on the bed, pinning her wrists above her head. My kisses traveled downward, from her neck to her collarbone, continuing lower. My heated breath sometimes accompanied by a husky groan. Her body trembled in response. I removed my hearing aid. She leaned toward my right ear, chuckled softly, seemingly seeing right through me. Then, shamelessly, she breathed moans and gasps in my ear. Even with one ear, it seemed the sounds in the room were still too loud. The night was still young. After graduation, Linda and I smoothly got married. When we returned from the honeymoon, my parents bought a townhouse villa in the suburbs for their retirement. They worried the movers would damage their old stuff, insisting on doing it themselves. On moving day, Linda and I went to help. A box in Mom's hands broke open, the bottom damp and worn. Everything spilled on the floor. I stepped forward, seeing my high school textbooks on the ground. My fingers landed on a leather-bound yearbook. Curiosity piqued. I flipped through a few pages. Each one a message from my classmates at Z High School, wishing me success in the college entrance exam, hoping I'd get into my dream school and wishing me happiness. At the bottom were their own wishes, half for wealth and beauty, half hoping to become a pop star or singer. My fingers paused on the last page. Linda's. Back then, everyone was writing in each other's yearbooks, passing them around the chaotic classroom. I was busy writing messages and sharing contact info with others, never reading through a page. This was my first time seeing Linda's entry. Her note wished me well in getting into my dream school. Underneath the wishes section, she wrote just 2 words. Marry you. Linda's epilogue. Linda never told Brian. When he stood at the podium introducing himself, just one glance was all it took. That familiar face and voice. Hi everyone, I'm Brian. In her memory, a little boy in blue overalls followed her around. I'm Brian. Later on, she became familiar with Brian. Spent all her allowance buying him candy. She'd say, I bought this candy for my husband. She vaguely knew that a husband was someone you spend your life with. Brian said, then I'll be your husband. Thanks to her, 6-year-old Brian had cavities before he even lost his baby teeth. Seeing him up there in that dark red plaid skirt and white shirt uniform, her heart skipped a beat. She couldn't help but smile. Her husband, he's back. Someone noticed her expression, clearly shocked. She shot them a look and pretended to nap on her desk. Never expected Brian to be seated right in front of her, listening to her chat with George. Her nose filled with the scent of him. After school, she didn't leave. She waited until Brian finished studying. She was sure he'd wake her up because George had told him the school would lock up. And sure enough, he did. She held back a grin, looked at his close-up pretty face and said, "Thanks." Then, seeing his stunned eyes, she smiled and got up to leave. At home, she dreamed about her childhood. At 7, she and her mom returned home, hearing her dad's voice mingling with a woman's cooing. In her ears, the sounds of her dad begging in fear and her mom's angry questioning, followed by her dad's embarrassed apology turning into anger. She rushed in, standing in front of her mom to protect her. But her dad threw her into a room and locked the door. Outside, she heard things being smashed. Then all sounds stopped. The door was opened by Brian. He hugged her as she curled up in the corner. Brian brought her loads of candy, his favorite thing back then. He didn't know what was happening, just that it scared all kids. By evening, her parents returned, each holding a red book and some documents. Her mom packed with red eyes, booking tickets abroad. Her dad sneered, leaving with his arm around his secretary. The house was now just hers. It wasn't until late that her grandparents came to take her back to their old home. In the car, she tried to memorize the road. But by the next day, she'd forgotten. She tried going back, but her grandparents, thinking she wanted to find her parents, would just sigh and stop her. She just wanted to find Brian. She knew she'd been abandoned by her parents. City D was so big. Even though she looked week after week, she never found her way back. City D was so small. Small enough for her to meet Brian again. Summer never really left. We were bound to meet again.